Thank you, Richard. I think I can safely say that our consenting journey wasn't quite as difficult as yours, but we certainly had our share of challenges. So, good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for this opportunity to talk to you. I've recently joined the team at Dalman Architects, and tonight I'm going to talk to you about my house in South Shore that I designed jointly with my wife, Dulcie. Dulcie and I are both architects, and Dulcie is a director of Follow Group Architecture, and Follow Group kindly produced documentation and drawings for this house. So first of all, let's talk to you about our approach and our personal brief. Dulcie and I have lived in South Shore for about 14 years. We really wanted this house to celebrate coastal living. It's a house that's designed specifically for us, the way that we live, and the way that and now and in the future. And it was important to us to design a house really push sustainable design and deliver a really warm and healthy home. So I'm going to talk to you a bit about the site and the constraints and opportunities that offered for us from a design perspective and for our consenting journey. And we'll talk about the sense of place and how it's important to be part of our coastal environment, both for us as the owners of the house and for the resource consent journey. I'll talk about orientation and light, how we achieved our high performance healthy house using SIPs, insulated panels, a heat exchanger, high performance glass and building orientation and those kind of things. And I'll talk about how the house will evolve with its environment, and conclude with a summary about our consenting journey. Then at the end, what I'd also like to do is to talk to you a bit about the high flood hazard management area. That doesn't directly affect our site in South Shore, which I'll talk to you a bit about. But I've been working with CCRU quite a bit over the years, and thought I'd share some thoughts and insights on building in the high flood hazard management area, particularly in South Shore. So the site, it's located just off Rocking Horse Road on Penguin Street, right at the end on the beach side, on a raised section. It's raised about 2.5 metres above the road, which means we're above the flood hazard management requirements that affect a lot of South Shore. So you sort of arrive up a steep driveway ramp, and there's quite a steep retaining wall along that boundary to the west to our wonderful neighbours next to us in the west, Paul and Sarah, who were a great help during our consenting journey. So we made a decision quite early in our design process that we'd work with the contours of the land, because we knew that minimising earthworks is quite an important part of resource consent in this area. So the site has got sort of a natural low point at the southern end, which works well for a garage for easy access into the site, and then grades gradually by about 300 millimetres from the southern end to the northern end. So the northern end is at the highest point of the site, where we had the lounge and things like that. So interestingly about this site, the Marine Parade actually continues all the way down Rocking Horse Road as far as Turn Street towards Tim and Jan's house. And it's obviously an unformed paper road, but that influences the constraints of the site, which is quite interesting. It'll affect all of the houses along that edge. So the site constraints, there's a 1 metre setback from the two neighbouring properties. So Paul and Sarah's place here and the properties to the north here. The boundary at this edge is reasonably straightforward, and there's quite a tricky recession plane along this edge to the west edge, which I'll talk to you about. And then there's a 4.5 metre setback from each of the roads, so 4.5 metres from Penguin Street and 4.5 metres from Marine Parade or the beach. Now, we made a decision to work within this constraint as much as we could, and the only thing we had to do is for the garage is within the road setback, as well as the decks and paving, which the council accepted was less than minor, and they allowed us to do that. So the recession planes, which Richard described to you earlier, is this sort of imaginary box that goes over the top of your house. One of the tricky thing for us with this site is that to our neighbours on the west, the boundary is at the bottom of the retaining wall, which means that the start of the recession plane journey is quite a long way below ground level, which means that the recession plane comes up quite quickly before it even gets over the fence, and then comes up at 35 degrees, which gave us quite a tricky constraint on the western edge. Where we made a decision to work within that, to respect our neighbours, make sure they got good daylight, and we didn't overlook them too much. In fact, the previous house that was on there was Chaplain Crook's house. Went through the recession planes, but it was of similar kind of used similar qualities of the site. So yeah, we just squeaked underneath it. It's a recession plane. We had on the beach side there was no recession plane, so we were allowed to work within the 8-metre height limit, which came from their natural ground level. So we were quite unrestricted to that edge. One of the things we did was we created this sort of roof form that sort of works with the recession planes, and we had a little glass slot between the two roof forms, which brings in lovely morning light into the middle of the house and makes for a really light house. This is also the highest point in the house, so there's on electric openers, window openers, so to pull out heat from the height as warm air rises, pull out heat from the house in the peak summer months, which works really well. So one of the first things we did when we visited this site was to borrow a drone and lift the drone up to eye level on the first floor to make sure that we could see the ocean. And that was an exercise that was well worth doing, and that was a real key driver to how we planned out the house. So we got quite a high stud height on the ground floor of 2.7 metres, which provides quite a generous space for all the living spaces on the ground floor, and make sure that it did work, and everybody, including my young children, can see the ocean in from their bedroom on the first floor. So, oops, I've gone a bit too fast. Go back one. So, okay. So part of our consenting journey was the council asked us to confirm what they called the natural ground levels were of the section. It was raised up and different from the other properties in the nearby flood hazard management areas. And basically, we're trying to prove that the dune wasn't man-made. So the way that we demonstrated that was with photographic records, which are all publicly available. And we went back to the 1950s when the site was first subdivided, and we were able to sort of demonstrate that there was sort of a raised contour around 15 Penguin Street, and then a sort of a horseshoe shape of macrocarpa trees that are quite young in that picture. That had always been there, and as you know, over the years, various houses to the empty site that we bought in 2016 after that previous house was demolished. The natural environment changes all the time, but the key thing we were trying to demonstrate was that the ground was effectively natural, and it was in its natural state. So, sense of place. So to us as the client and as the architect, it was important for us for our house to sit well in its coastal environment, and for it to be sort of at one with where it is. It was also an important part of the resource consent journey, in that the council wanted us to minimise earthworks and have the reasonably light touch on the land, and not remove too much material. So the design does that. We minimise the disturbance of the land and don't remove too much ground, where we made a commitment to use native planting. We had some conditions on archaeology in case we've discovered anything on the site while we were building, which we didn't, and some conditions on managing sediment from the site. So we had this view that we're kind of custodians of this site. We feel it's a real privilege to live in such a beautiful place, and we were kind of looking after it and doing our bit for our community. So our MKT, we went through, had an MKT consultation process in a similar way that Richard did, but it was more easier for them to support, because Richard had some challenges with his. But because it was, we were quite well aligned, and there were quite small things that we needed to do, but it was a worthwhile process to show a commitment to New Zealand's history and the history of the Spit, and it was quite an interesting process to go through with them. Next slide might be a little slow. Okay, so this is the plan of the house. So I'd just to talk you through how the house works. So you arrive up the driveway, and there's quite a prominent main entrance into the site. It's important for us to have quite a clear entry experience. You arrive up a series of steps under a pergola shade structure into a double height space where there's a large full height window at the end with views of a pond and the dunes beyond. So there's a real sense of arrival, and you know that you've arrived at the beach. Down a few steps to the low point of the site with the garages, and then through the hallway to the various living spaces. Each of those have their own outdoor space, so we can enjoy indoor-outdoor living to any of those living spaces. So the family room to the dining room, and up to the north, the highest point of the site, up a few more steps to a raised lounge with a wraparound deck, west, north, east. So there's always somewhere outside to enjoy the sun. Maybe not in a southerly, but most of the time. Okay, so that's a ground floor plan. And so the stairs are located in the middle of the house. You arrive up the stairs into a landing arrival space with a view of the dunes and the Pacific Ocean, and an east-facing balcony, which we use from time to time, to take in the breeze. Master bedroom to the north with views from the estuary all the way around to Godley Head, and the ensuite bathroom and robe tucked in behind the bedroom. Bedrooms for my two boys, both exactly the same, so there's no arguments. And their bathroom here, overlooking the void, and all of the bedrooms enjoy that view of the ocean. So this is in our dining room and kitchen. So the house is very light because of the placement of windows. We've got most of the windows on the beach side because we really want to enjoy that view. Some windows on the north as well, and sparing use of windows on the west where you get quite hot sun, and to avoid the overlooking of our neighbours. So, yeah, it's a view of the raised lounge. This is a view from on the western deck. So this is where you can sit sheltered from the easterly wind, but you can look right through the house and still see the dunes. And at some point I'll remove the fence, and so you can just see the dunes from anywhere in the house on the ground floor. So I talked a bit earlier on about how we achieved our high-performance healthy home. We used quite a new product to New Zealand called SIPS, which is a structurally insulated panel. We use that for the walls and the roof, which is kind of instead of conventional wall framing. And it has a very high insulation value. So we're able to achieve insulation about 2.5 times what's in the building code, which makes for a very warm house, as the added benefit of air tightness as well. And as all the joints get sealed, and it makes for quite a stable internal temperature. So we combine that with a heat exchange system, which we got from Switzerland, which was what that does is it draws in fresh air from the outside and uses the heat from inside the house, so that's body heat from the bathrooms, the kitchen, and transfers that heat into the fresh air and sends it around the house, and then grabs the stale air and removes it, but all the while transferring heat to keep a stable temperature inside the house, which is on all the time. It means that you've always got fresh air, so it makes for a very healthy, fresh environment, and it's working quite well. I'm assured that I won't need another heat source because I've gone through that process. Have got a gas fire mainly for looks, and a plan B of heat pumps, but so far it's working very well. We use building orientation as well, so where we've got well-placed windows so that the house doesn't overheat, and we've got our ventilation strategy that I talked about earlier on. So overall, we're looking to experience significant health and comfort benefits and energy savings over and above a normal building code level house. So we did get building consent, and that was successful. We had a few additional hoops to jump through because we were outside the normal building code arrangement. So we had different producer statements and things, and just so that the council could understand what it is we were trying to do, because it was outside of the normal rules. But we did get there. That's worked well. So a view from the garden. So it's important to us that our home evolves with time. We've used cedar cladding, which is stained and treated just as an initial preservative, but our intention is that will weather naturally. Cedar goes silver naturally over time, which looks rather lovely, and it remains really durable as a material. And it's the same for our decks. We'll allow those to weather, and then as the garden matures around it, there's about 8 existing mature Bahutikaba trees, which make the garden rather lovely, and the garden will mature over time. So in summary, our consent journey. So we demonstrated what the natural ground levels were for the starting point of the height of the house. We minimized earthworks as much as we could. Our site is a TC2 site. We were able to build a reasonably simple concrete raft that followed the contours of the ground. I think it was about 300 thick on gravel. But not quite as complicated as Rich's stone piles, which are quite something. What's interesting is that the beach side of Rockinghorse Road, the sand gets compacted by the waves, so the sand is actually quite dense and compacted and much more solid than it is on the estuary edge, where it's just much more by sediment from river action. So that's why that side is TC3. So there's quite different ground conditions on the estuary edge than there is on the beachfront. So yes, also keep going with our consent summary. We minimised earthworks. We were using native planting. We had this minor intrusion into the road setback on the beach edge for the garage and the decks. And we had minimal impact on the flood management area. We're completely outside the high flood hazard management area. The flood management component was just at the entrance to the driveway, which is obviously a little bit lower. That was all deemed to be less than minor, because all we were doing was replacing or repairing existing structures, which is the entrance concrete structure and the retaining wall with our neighbour. So that all went well. So I mean, through all that process, I mean, we were in quite a reasonably comfortable place in terms of getting through our resource consent, but we still needed to get written agreement from our neighbours at 13 Penguin Street, which we got in advance, and that all seemed to go well. And the council were in strong support, but in the end they decided that that wasn't enough and that we needed to submit a joint resource consent with both of our properties together, because the retaining wall that we replaced was right on the boundary and was partly on their land and partly on ours. So I mean, we're fortunate that we got a really good relationship with Paul and Sarah, our neighbours, and if it had been different, it could have been a much more difficult journey. So it's really important to be kind to your neighbours, and it's really important on all sorts of levels. So in the end we got that our MKT support. That was quite smooth, and we achieved our resource consent and building consent, and we were able to build our house, which we're really proud of. It's a really joy to live in. We're very lucky. So to conclude, I thought I'd just talk a little bit about building in a high flood management area, because I realise my house is luckily slightly above some of the hazards. Just to give you a little bit of history, there was a district plan change a couple of years after the earthquake, I think it was about 2012, which brought in a number of rules about high flood hazard management and other things. But it was written in a way that was really trying to discourage development. Richard used the word earlier on, avoid, which is quite an important term. It was trying to encourage people to avoid developing. And for a number of years, while we were sort of battling through that, it just looked like it was going to be very difficult to build, and from the way that it was written. But what's happened as time has progressed is that there's increasing numbers of precedents for success, and there's lots of brave people, Richard and others, who've gone and built, and there's some subdivision that's happened in Southshore. There's previous earthquake houses that have been replaced. There's even empty sections that have never been built on before that have now got houses on them and have been developed. So that's great for our area, and it encourages people that it can be done, you can build. I mean, each house is unique, as Richard alluded to earlier on. And each situation is different. But there's still, we should be encouraged by the fact that people have been able to achieve that. So within those planning rules, there's what's something called existing use rights, which is something you can use. It's usually time bound by a year from the demolition of the previous building, and that can allow you to replace a previously existing house, which can be a good avenue for consent. There's there's also a rule that was added in to the district plan on replacement of earthquake damaged property, which isn't time bound, and that's thanks to a lot of hard work from CCRU to get that change added back in, and others in the audience who helped us. It was a really important piece of change. So building in a high flood area, and there's one of the key things is raised floor levels, which in Redcliffs is 1.3 metres, in South Shore it's 1.5. I mean, I think I'd encourage you all to see that as an opportunity. I mean, it's here, it's a thing, and you use that as a way to flow from your living spaces out to the outside. Be creative with that. Could you put a garage underneath it, store the kayaks underneath it, find other functions for it, and you can make a sort of considered, well-rounded outcome. It's not necessarily an obstacle. I'd urge you to consider demountable building technologies and sustainability. I mean, these are things that are up and coming. I mean, there's a few examples of demountable houses in South Shore already. I mean, people have tried to join things together and that kind of thing. Didn't really suit us, but I think we all have a responsibility to build as sustainably as we can, try and save energy. I mean, all of this situation that we're in with high flood is a result of climate change, and we've got to do our bit to try and mitigate it and build better. Be kind to your neighbours. It's really important. Be their friends. It's important to, it's really important. I'd advise you all to get specialist planning advice early. The issues are really complicated, and you're always going to have to get a resource consent when you're building in this kind of area. And the resource consent parameters really define the fundamentals of the siting of your house, how big it is, and they're quite big things. And if you lock those decisions early, you can do it with a relatively small outlay before you've done all your building consent drawings and detailed every stroke, when it's just quite a lot of work and you don't want to unpick that because of what's come on board for you through resource consent. So do that planning process as early as you can. And finally, work with an architect that understands the specifics of designing in a coastal environment. It's important, and there's some complex stuff in there. Thank you, everybody. That's me.